"Just move," she sneered, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "Some people get these seats through points, employee freebies." You think those words stung? They barely scratched the surface. What Karen Preston didn't know, what none of them knew, was that those kids weren't just some randoms. See, a quiet text message, sent right as the plane taxied, was about to turn first class upside down. This wasn't about an upgrade. It was about dignity, about knowing your worth. They messed with the wrong family. What follows? Epic karma. And it starts with the unsettling feeling that maybe, just maybe, kindness hides a quiet storm. The captain is baffled, the crew is in chaos, and the entitled passenger who started it all is about to learn that the two quiet twins she targeted are not who she thinks they are. Stay tuned for a story of epic karma and a lesson in humility you won't forget. The low-resonant hum of the Boeing 777's engines was a familiar lullaby to 17-year-old twins Chloe and Jordan Sinclair. As seasoned travelers, they had crossed the Atlantic more times than they could count, the journey between their homes in New York and London, a regular part of their lives. Today they were nestled into the plush, spacious pods of first class on Aura Airlines Flight 114, a direct route from JFK to Heathrow. The pre-departure champagne, sparkling apple cider for them had been served, and the soft ambient lighting of the cabin promised a comfortable 7-hour journey. Chloe, ever the artist, was already lost in her sketchbook, her charcoal pencil dancing across the page as she captured the distorted reflection of the cabin in her spoon. Jordan, the more pragmatic of the two, was meticulously organizing his noise-cancelling headphones and tablet, curating a playlist of documentaries to pass the time. They were quiet, self-contained, and perfectly content in their own little worlds, their matching designer tracksuits the only overt sign of their shared identity. The disruption began not with a bang, but with a huff. A woman, who looked to be in her late 40s, dripping in gold jewelry and radiating an aura of brittle entitlement, stopped short in the aisle. Her perfectly coiffed blonde hair seemed to bristle as her gaze fell upon Chloe and Jordan. Her name, they would later learn, was Karen Preston. She flagged down a passing flight attendant with a sharp, impatient gesture. "Excuse me," Karen said, her voice a low but piercing drawl that cut through the cabin's calm. "I believe there's been a mistake." The flight attendant, a woman named Susan, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, stopped and turned. "How can I help you, ma'am?" Karen pointed a manicured finger, its blood-red nail seeming to accuse the twins. "These children," she said, the word dripping with disdain, "are in my and my husband's seats, 2A and 2B. Susan's professional gaze flickered over to the twins. Jordan, ever alert, had already paused his documentary selection. He met her eyes calmly. "I think you'll find we're in the correct seats," he said, his voice polite but firm. "We're in 3A and 3B. He held up his boarding pass, the seat number clearly visible. Chloe looked up from her sketchbook, a silent, questioning look on her face. Susan glanced at Jordan's pass, then at the manifest on her tablet. A flicker of something unreadable crossed her face. "Yes, I see that," she acknowledged, but her tone was dismissive. She turned back to Karen. "I'm sure we can sort this out, Mrs. Preston. Let me see your boarding passes." Karen's husband, a stout man, with a face permanently flushed from what looked like high blood pressure, huffed and puffed as he produced their tickets. They were indeed for seats 2A and 2B. "There must be some misunderstanding," Susan said, her smile tightening. She looked back at Chloe and Jordan, her expression now shifting, becoming cooler, more appraising. It was a look the twins knew all too well. It was the look that assessed their youth, their race, and their casual attire, and came to a swift, incorrect conclusion. "I'm so sorry," Susan began, her voice taking on a tone of synthetic sweetness that set Jordan's teeth on edge. "It seems we have a bit of a seating mix-up. We are slightly overbooked in this cabin." She didn't look at her tablet or consult any system. Her eyes were fixed on them. "I'm going to have to ask you to move." Jordan's eyebrows knitted together. "Move where?" "These are our assigned seats. We booked them months ago." "Yes, I understand," Susan said, her patience clearly wearing thin. "But we have a situation. We need these seats. There are 2 perfectly good seats available for you in economy." The word hung in the air, heavy and insulting economy. It wasn't about the comfort. It was about the principle. It was about the clear, unspoken assumption that they didn't belong here, that their tickets were somehow less valid than the Prestons. Chloe finally spoke, her voice soft, but laced with steel. "We paid for these seats. Why should we be the ones to move?" Karen Preston let out an audible scoff. "Oh, for heaven's sake!" She muttered loud enough for the entire front cabin to hear. "Just move. Some people get these seats through points or employee freebies. It's not like you actually paid for them." The accusation was blatant, ugly, and hung in the perfumed air of the first-class cabin like a toxic fog. Several other passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their eyes darting between the entitled woman and the 2 teenagers. No one said a word. Jordan felt a familiar hot surge of anger, but he pushed it down, his father's voice echoing in his mind. "Stay calm. Never let them see you lose your cool. Your mind is your sharpest weapon." He looked directly at Susan. "I can assure you, Mom, these seats were paid for in full. We are not moving. If the cabin is overbooked, that is an airline issue, not ours. You need to find another solution." Susan's face hardened. The plastic smile vanished completely, replaced by a mask of cold authority. "Sir," she said, her voice now sharp and clipped, "I am not asking you. I am telling you. You are creating a disturbance. Either you take the seats in economy, or I will have you and your sister removed from this aircraft for non-compliance with a crew member's instructions. We are on a schedule. The threat was clear. They were being framed as the problem. 2 black teenagers in expensive tracksuits were being labeled troublemakers for quietly sitting in the seats they had paid for. The injustice of it was staggering. Chloe's hand found Jordan's under the armrest, her fingers trembling slightly. He gave her a reassuring squeeze, a silent promise that he would handle this. But as he looked at Susan's unyielding face and Karen Preston's smug, triumphant smirk, he felt a knot of helplessness tighten in his stomach. For now it seemed they had no choice. "Fine," Jordan said, his voice low and tight with suppressed fury. He stood up, avoiding the eyes of the other passengers, the shame and humiliation of physical weight on his shoulders. "Come on, Chloe." As they gathered their belongings, Susan gestured for another flight attendant to show them to their new inferior seats. "Thank you for your cooperation," she said, her voice dripping with insincere politeness. Karen Preston settled into her seat with a satisfied sigh, not even bothering to glance their way. As Jordan passed her, he made brief eye contact. The look in her eyes was one of pure, unadulterated victory. It was a look that said, "I won. You lost. Know your place." It was a look Jordan Sinclair would not soon forget. As he walked down the aisle, leaving the rarefied air of first class behind for the cramped confines of economy, he wasn't just angry. He was determined. This was far from over. The walk from first class to economy felt like a mealing parade of shame. Every eye in the premium economy and business class section seemed to follow them, their gazes a mixture of pity, curiosity, and uncomfortable avoidance. Jordan kept his head held high, his jaw set, but he could feel Chloe shrinking beside him. He wrapped a protective arm around her shoulder as they navigated the narrower aisle. They were led to 2 middle seats in row 38, wedged between a snoring man whose shoulders spilled over the armrests, and a young mother trying to soothe a crying baby. The contrast with their spacious private pods at the front of the plane was jarring. The air was thicker, the noise level higher, and the legroom practically non-existent. It was a physical manifestation of their humiliation. "Here you are," the second flight attendant said, offering a weak, apologetic smile before quickly retreating back to the relative calm of the forward cabins. Chloe sank into her seat, pulling the hood of her tracksuit over her head. Jordan could see her shoulders shaking. He reached over and took her hand again. "Hey," he whispered. "It's okay. We're okay." "It's not okay, Geordie," she whispered back, her voice choked with emotion. That woman. The way she looked at us, the way they all just watched like we were the problem. "I know," he said, his own anger simmering just beneath the surface. "I know, but we're not going to let them win. I promise you." He settled into his own seat, the injustice of it all a bitter taste in his mouth. He thought of his father, Robert Sinclair, a man who had built his entire career on principles of fairness, hard work, and treating every single person with respect, from the baggage handlers to the board members. He had raised his children to believe in their own worth, to never let anyone diminish them because of their age, their background, or the color of their skin. And here they were being treated like second-class citizens on his own airline. His own airline. The irony was almost too much to bear. Jordan glanced around. The plane was fully boarded, and the final announcements were being made. The cabin doors were closed with a resounding thud. They were sealed in this metal tube, flying thousands of feet above the earth, with the people who had wronged them sitting comfortably just a few dozen yards away. But they weren't powerless. Not entirely. He pulled out his phone. The flight attendants had already instructed everyone to switch their devices to airplane mode, but he was quick. He navigated to his contacts, his thumb hovering over the name Dad for a second before scrolling to a different entry. David Chen, Chief of Staff. His father had a strict rule. No calls about personal matters during work hours unless it was a true emergency. But this, Jordan decided, qualified. This wasn't just a personal slight. This was about the culture of the company his father had poured his life into. This was an attack on everything he stood for. He typed out a short, precise text message, his fingers flying across the screen. "David, apologies for the out-of-protocol contact. Chloe and I are on AA Flight 114, JFK to LHR. We were just forcibly moved from our paid first-class seats, 3A, 3B, to economy by a flight attendant named Susan. A passenger, Karen Preston, in 2A, initiated the complaint. The reason given was an overbooking issue, but the implication was clearly discriminatory. We were threatened with removal from the flight if we didn't comply. This is a matter of principle. Can you please inform my father? This needs to be addressed. Jordan Sinclair." He read it over once, ensuring the facts were clear and the tone was measured, despite the rage churning inside him. He hit send just as the plane began its slow push back from the gate. A moment later, the delivered receipt appeared. He switched his phone to airplane mode and slipped it back into his pocket. He leaned back in his cramped seat, the baby next to him still wailing, the man on his other side still snoring. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to picture the sequence of events his text message had just set in motion. David Chen was his father's right-hand man, a man of legendary efficiency and discretion, The message would be read, it would be understood, and it would be acted upon. It might take a few minutes, but a call would be made. A very, very important call. Chloe looked at him, her eyes red-rimmed but questioning. "What did you do?" Jordan met her gaze and gave her a small, confident smile. "I just lodged a formal complaint," he said, with the highest authority I could think of. He didn't need to say more. A flicker of understanding and then hope ignited in Chloe's eyes. She squeezed his hand, a silent "thank you." They settled into an uneasy silence, the hum of the engines now a sound of anticipation. They didn't know exactly what would happen next, but they knew one thing for certain. The flight had just started. But for Karen Preston and flight attendant Susan, the journey was about to take a very sharp, unexpected and turbulent turn. The ground was still close, but they were about to feel the full authority of the man who owned the sky. The Boeing 757 rumbled down the taxiway, its powerful engines whining in anticipation of takeoff. Inside, the cabin crew completed their final checks. The passengers settled in, and the routine of air travel unfolded as it had thousands of times before. In first class, Karen Preston sipped her complimentary glass of champagne, a smug little smile playing on her lips as she recounted her victory to her husband in a hushed but gleeful tone. "It's about maintaining standards," she whispered. "You just have to be firm." Flight attendant Susan moved through the cabin with renewed confidence. Her earlier confrontation having seemingly reinforced her sense of authority. She felt a small thrill of satisfaction. She had handled a difficult situation, enforced the rules as she interpreted them, and put those entitled kids in their place. Everything was back in order. The plane reached the head of the runway, its nose pointed towards the heavens. The engine spooled up, the roar intensifying, pressing the passengers back into their seats. The moment of commitment was here. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the roar subsided. The immense thrust vanished, replaced by the gentle hum of the idling engines. The plane, instead of hurtling down the runway, took a slow, deliberate turn, moving away from the active takeoff lane and onto a secluded taxiway near the terminal. It came to a complete stop. A collective murmur rippled through the aircraft. Delays were common, but aborting a takeoff at the very last second was not. Passengers exchanged confused glances. In first class, Karen Preston lowered her champagne glass with an annoyed clink. "Now what?" She sighed dramatically. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, calm and professional, but with an undercurrent of bewilderment that did not go unnoticed. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Apologies for that unexpected maneuver. We've just received an instruction from our ground control operations here at JFK. We are to hold our current position on the tarmac. We have not been given a specific reason for the hold at this time, but we are told it comes directly from the Executive Command Center. I will provide you with an update as soon as I have more information. For now, we ask that you please remain seated. Cabin crew, please hold your positions. Executive Command Center." The phrase hung in the air, sounding far more serious than a typical weather delay or air traffic control issue. In the economy section, Jordan and Chloe exchanged a look. A slow smile spread across Jordan's face. It was happening faster than he could have ever imagined. Up front, Susan frowned. She had been a flight attendant for 15 years and had never heard of a flight being halted on the tarmac by the Executive Command Center. Her mind raced through the possibilities. A security threat, a VIP who missed the flight, a serious mechanical issue they hadn't been told about. Her unease deepened when her personal crew tablet pinged with a notification. It was a single cryptic message from the chief purser at the front of the plane. "Susan, report to the forward galley now." She made her way to the front, her heels clicking on the floor. The chief purser, a stern, experienced woman named Maria, was waiting for her, her face pale and grim. "What's going on?" Susan asked, her voice a little shaky. "Do you know why we've been stopped?" Maria looked at her, and for the first time in their years of working together, Susan saw genuine fear in her colleague's eyes. "I don't know for sure," Maria said, her voice barely a whisper. "But I just got a call from the director of in-flight services on his personal cell. He wanted a name." "A name? What name?" "He asked me who the lead flight attendant was in the first-class cabin on this flight," Maria said, her gaze unwavering. "I gave him yours, Susan. Then he asked me another question. He asked me if there had been any seating reassignments in the first-class cabin prior to departure." A cold dread, heavy and numbing, began to seep into Susan's bones. This couldn't be a coincidence. The overlooked cabin, the two teenagers, the sudden, inexplicable grounding of the entire aircraft. The pieces were starting to click into place, forming a picture she did not want to see. "What did you tell him?" Susan asked, her own voice now a whisper. "I told him the truth," Maria replied, her expression hardening. "I told him that you had reported a manifest error and moved 2 passengers from row 3 to economy to accommodate the Prestons." He was silent for a moment, and then he said 4 words I have never heard in my entire career. "What were they?" Susan breathed, almost afraid to hear the answer. Maria looked her dead in the eye. "Ground the plane immediately." Susan felt the blood drain from her face. The hum of the engine seemed to fade into a distant roar in her ears. Ground the plane over a seating dispute. It was impossible. It was insane. Who were those kids? Who could possibly have that kind of power? Her thoughts were interrupted by a flurry of activity outside the aircraft. The flashing lights of an airport authority vehicle could be seen approaching the plane. The ground crew, who had been waiting to guide the plane off, were now standing back, looking on with confusion. Then the jet bridge, which had been retracted for departure, began to slowly, ominously, extend back towards the plane's main door. A heavy metallic clank echoed through the cabin as it locked into place. A few passengers gasped, their faces pressed against the windows. Karen Preston was one of them. "They're connecting the bridge again," she exclaimed, her voice a mixture of annoyance and alarm. "Are they letting someone on?" "What is going on?" Susan didn't have an answer. She could only stand there in the forward galley, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs as the main cabin door was unsealed. A rush of cool outside air filled the cabin. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright lights of the terminal, was a man in a sharply tailored suit. He was not a passenger. He was not a member of the ground crew. He held an Aura Airlines executive ID, and his face was a mask of grim, unsmiling authority. He stepped onto the plane, his gaze sweeping over the cabin before landing with laser-like precision on Susan. He didn't need to ask for her. He already knew. "Susan Miller?" he asked, his voice calm, but carrying an undeniable weight of command. Susan could only nod, her throat suddenly too dry to speak. "I'm Martin Shaw, Vice President of North American Operations for Aura Airlines," he said, his voice loud enough for the entire first-class cabin to hear. "I need you to come with me. We have a serious matter to discuss, a matter that concerns the 2 passengers you removed from this cabin." The silence that followed was absolute. Every eye was now on Susan, her face a mess of confusion and dawning terror. Karen Preston stared, her mouth agape. In that moment, Susan finally understood she had made a mistake, a terrible, career-ending, life-altering mistake. and the consequences were just beginning to arrive. Martin Shaw, the Vice President of North American Operations, was a man who exuded an aura of calm, decisive power. He was known within Aura Airlines as the Fixer, the man the CEO dispatched when a situation required not just management, but absolute resolution. His unexpected appearance on the grounded Flight 114 sent a palpable wave of shock and anxiety through the cabin crew. He ignored the stunned faces of the passengers and the chief purser, his entire focus on a now trembling Susan. "Miss Miller," he repeated his tone, leaving no room for argument. "Let's have a word in private." He gestured towards the galley. Susan, looking ashen, stumbled into the small space with Martin Shaw following close behind. He pulled the curtain closed, but his voice was intentionally pitched to carry into the first-class cabin, where Karen Preston and her husband were now sitting bolt upright, their ears straining to listen. "Miss Miller," Martin began, his voice low and cutting. "I need you to explain to me in detail the justification for removing 2 ticketed, confirmed first-class passengers from their assigned seats and reassigning them to the economy cabin." Susan swallowed hard, her mind scrambling for a defense. There was a manifest discrepancy. The cabin was overbooked. Mr. and Mrs. Preston held tickets for row 2, and I needed to accommodate them. I made a judgment call to resolve the situation and ensure an on-time departure. She omitted the part about her assumptions, about her dismissive attitude, about the threat she had leveled at the teenagers. Martin Shaw stared at her, his expression unreadable. "A manifest discrepancy," he repeated, the words sounding hollow and absurd. "Our system is state-of-the-art, Miss Miller. It does not create manifest discrepancies. It is, however, designed to flag potential issues for senior crew to resolve with diplomacy and respect. Tell me, did you offer the Prestons an alternative? Did you offer them compensation to take a later flight, as is standard procedure in a legitimate overbooking scenario?" "I know there wasn't time," Susan stammered. "I assessed that the other passengers, the Sinclair teenagers, were the most logical choice to move." "Logical? On what basis did you make that logical assessment?" Martin pressed, his voice like chipping ice. "Was it their age, their casual attire, or was it perhaps their race?" The question, blunt and brutal, hung in the small galley. Susan flinched as if struck. "No, of course not. I would never." "You never would," Martin interrupted, his voice rising in volume, clearly audible to everyone nearby. "Because it seems to me you made a snap judgment based on a prejudiced assumption that 2 young black teenagers couldn't possibly belong in your first-class cabin. You didn't see paying customers. You saw an inconvenience. You saw an easy target, and you were wrong." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Dead wrong." He then turned and pulled back the curtain, his gaze sweeping across the now silent first-class cabin. His eyes landed on Karen Preston, who shrank back in her seat, the color draining from her face. "Mrs. Preston," Martin said, his voice resonating with authority. "My name is Martin Shaw, an executive with this airline. I understand you were party to the seating issue." Karen, flustered, tried to regain her composure. "Well, yes, we were in our assigned seats. That flight attendant," she pointed a trembling finger at Susan, "was just doing her job." "Her job, Mrs. Preston, is to ensure the safety and comfort of all our passengers," Martin countered, his tone sharp. "Her job is not to enforce a social hierarchy based on your personal prejudices. Her job is certainly not to humiliate teenagers who are, in fact, some of this airline's most valued customers." He let that statement hang in the air for a moment before delivering the final devastating blow. I believe you questioned whether the Sinclair children had actually paid for their seats. Let me put your mind at ease. They did not. Their tickets are part of a family travel account, an account that belongs to their father. He paused, his eyes locking onto Karen's, then onto Susan's. He savored the moment, the dawning horror on their faces. And their father, he continued, his voice clear and resonant, is Mr. Robert Sinclair. Perhaps you've heard of him. He's the founder, majority shareholder, and chief executive officer of Aura Airlines. Silence. A thick, suffocating silence descended upon the cabin. You could have heard a pin drop. Champagne glasses were frozen halfway to lips. The only sound was the faint, mocking hum of the auxiliary power unit. Karen Preston's jaw fell open. Her face, a moment ago smug and triumphant, was now a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. She looked from Martin Shaw to the galley where Susan stood, as if turned to stone, her face the color of chalk. The CEO, they had bullied and belittled the CEO's children. The sheer catastrophic magnitude of their miscalculation crashed down upon them. This wasn't just a complaint. This wasn't just a reprimand. They had personally insulted the family of the man who owned the very plane they were sitting on. Martin Shaw wasn't finished. He pulled out his phone and spoke into it. "We've made contact. Send someone to retrieve them." He then turned his steely gaze back to Susan and Karen. "The two of you," he said, his voice cold and final, "have caused a significant disturbance. You have violated company policy, and you have caused immense distress to fellow passengers. More importantly, you have fundamentally misrepresented the values of this airline." A junior flight attendant, wide-eyed and nervous, appeared at his side. "Please," Martin instructed the junior attendant, his voice softening slightly. "Go to row 38 seats, ENF. You will find Chloe and Jordan Sinclair there. Please inform them that Mr. Shaw is here to see them, and would be grateful if they would accompany you back to the first-class cabin. Treat them with the respect they should have been afforded from the very beginning." As the young attendant hurried down the aisle, Martin Shaw's attention returned to the two women who had caused the chaos. "As for you two," he said, his voice dropping to an icy calm, "your journey on Flight 114 is over. Please collect your belongings. You will be deplaning." Now, the command to deplane was not a suggestion. It was an edict delivered with the full weight of the corporation behind it. For a moment, Karen Preston seemed incapable of processing it. She just sat there, her face a comical tableau of disbelief and horror, her champagne flute still clutched in her hand. "The plane?" she finally stammered, her voice a squeak. "You can't be serious. We have a connecting flight, a cruise. I am a Diamond Medallion member." She recited her status like a holy incantation, a desperate last-ditch effort to assert the privilege that had, until moments ago, seemed so unassailable. Martin Shaw was unmoved. "Your status has been noted, Mrs. Preston, as has your behavior. The captain has determined that you and your husband are a security risk due to your disruptive and aggressive conduct towards other passengers and crew. That decision is final. An agent at the gate will assist you with rebooking your travel on another carrier. Aura Airlines will no longer be serving you." The finality of it was brutal. Another carrier. She was being fired as a customer. Her husband, who had remained silent and red-faced throughout the ordeal, finally spoke. "Now see here," he blustered. "This is an outrage. We'll sue. You are free to pursue any legal action you see fit." Martin interrupted smoothly, not even gracing him with a direct look. "Our legal department is quite robust. Now please gather your things. You are holding up the departure of over 300 other passengers." Defeated, the Preston began to move. The swift, merciless reversal of their fortunes was stunning to behold. Under the curious and unsympathetic glares of the other first-class passengers, they fumbled with their overhead luggage, their earlier arrogance replaced by a frantic, humiliated haste. The clatter of their roller bags being dragged down the aisle was the sound of karma being served, cold and immediate. Susan, meanwhile, was experiencing her own private hell. She stood frozen in the galley, the professional mask she had worn for 15 years shattered beyond repair. Maria, the chief purser, stood nearby, her expression a mixture of pity and professional disappointment. "Susan," she said softly, "go to the crew rest area. I'll handle your cabin." It was a small kindness, an attempt to shield her from the prying eyes of the passengers, but it felt like a funeral rite. Susan nodded numbly and disappeared behind the curtain, her career in free fall. Just as the Prestons reached the main door, their heads bowed in shame. Jordan and Chloe appeared at the front of the cabin, escorted by the junior flight attendant. The entire plane fell silent as they walked down the aisle. Their faces were composed, but their eyes held a quiet vindication. They didn't look at Karen or her husband. They didn't need to. Their very presence was a testament to the colossal mistake that had been made. Martin Shaw greeted them with a warm, respectful smile that was in stark contrast to the icy demeanor he had shown the others. "Jordan, Chloe, I am Martin Shaw. On behalf of every single employee at Aura Airlines, I want to offer you our deepest, most sincere apologies for what you have experienced today. It was unacceptable, unprofessional, and it will not be tolerated." Jordan nodded, appreciating the directness of the apology. "Thank you, Mr. Shaw. We appreciate you handling this so quickly. It's the least we could do," Martin said. He gestured back towards their original seats, which were now being meticulously cleaned and prepared by another flight attendant. "Your seats are ready for you. Please make yourselves comfortable. We've held the flight for you, and will be underway as soon as you are settled." The message was clear, not just to the twins, but to everyone watching. The flight waited for them. They were not the inconvenience. They were the priority. As Chloe and Jordan settled back into their plush pods, the very seats they had been forced to vacate, a subtle ripple of applause started in the business class cabin behind them. It was quiet at first, just a few passengers, but it grew, spreading through the front of the plane. It was an applause of relief, of approval, and of a shared sense of justice being served. It was a recognition that someone had finally stood up to the kind of casual, ugly entitlement they had all witnessed. Karen Preston heard it as she stepped onto the jet bridge. She flinched, the sound of the clapping a final public rebuke. The door to Aura Airlines Flight 114 closed behind her with a definitive sealing hiss. A few minutes later, the captain's voice came over the intercom once more. His tone was noticeably lighter, tinged with relief. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We have resolved our operational issue. Cabin crew, please prepare for takeoff." The engines roared back to life, this time for good. As the plane finally ascended into the sky, Chloe looked out the window at the receding lights of New York. She turned to Jordan, a small, weary smile on her face. "Well," she said, "that was something." Jordan leaned back, the tension finally leaving his shoulders. "I told you it wasn't over," he said. They knew the immediate drama had passed, but as the plane leveled out at its cruising altitude, a sense of gravity settled over them. This had been about more than just their seats. It was about a culture, a system that had allowed this to happen. And they both knew their father. For him, the immediate fallout was just the beginning. The real changes were yet to come. The repercussions of the incident on Flight 114 didn't end when the plane landed at Heathrow. In the age of social media, the story had already taken on a life of its own. Several passengers, empowered by Martin Shaw's decisive action, had discreetly filmed the deplaning of the Prestons and the twins' triumphant return to first class. By the time Jordan and Chloe had cleared customs, videos and accounts of the event were already circulating on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. AIza Airways and Danshahward's first-class karma. For Karen Preston, the fallout was catastrophic. She was a minor lifestyle influencer, her brand built on an image of aspirational wealth and classic taste. The videos showed a very different side of her, petty, racist, and entitled. Her diamond medallion boast became a meme overnight. Brands that had sponsored her posts dropped her within 48 hours. Her followers, repulsed by her behavior, abandoned her in droves. Her carefully curated online world crumbled into digital dust. The cruise she had been so desperate to catch sailed without her, and her name became a shorthand for public humiliation. The hard karma had not just hit back, it had obliterated her career. For Susan Miller, the consequences were professional and profound. She was placed on immediate indefinite leave. An internal investigation was launched, but the outcome was never in doubt. Her 15-year career with AIza Airlines was over. She was terminated not just for the single act of discrimination, but for what the investigation revealed to be a pattern of minor complaints and a dismissive attitude that had been previously overlooked. Her judgment call on Flight 114 was simply the final, unforgivable straw. She became a case study in the company's new intensive training modules, but the most significant changes happened within AIza Airlines itself, driven by a quiet but resolute Robert Sinclair. When his children landed, he wasn't waiting at the airport with fanfare. He was waiting at their London flat, having cleared his schedule completely. He hugged them both tightly, his relief palpable. He didn't need to ask for the details. David Chen and Martin Shaw had given him a full, unvarnished report. He listened as Chloe and Jordan recounted their feelings, the humiliation, the anger, the feeling of being judged and found wanting. He saw the hurt in their eyes, and it galvanized him. The following week, Robert Sinclair called an emergency meeting of the entire executive board of AIza Airlines. He didn't shout, he didn't rage. He spoke with a low, controlled intensity that was far more terrifying to the assembled vice presidents. On Friday last, he began. My own children were subjected to a degrading experience on one of our aircraft, an experience that I have come to learn is not as isolated as we would like to believe. They were targeted because they were young, because they were dressed casually, and because they were black, and a member of our crew, instead of protecting them, enabled the aggressor. He paused, letting the silence stretch. This is not a failure of one employee. This is a failure of our culture, a failure of our training, a failure of my leadership for allowing such a blind spot to exist. In the months that followed, the Sinclair mandate, as it became known, within the company, was rolled out. It was a complete overhaul of the airline's customer service and anti-discrimination policies. Training was no longer a 30-minute online module, but an intensive in-person course for all 60,000 employees, from the ramp agents to the senior pilots. Developed in partnership with leading civil rights organizations, it used the real-life incident on Flight 114, anonymized but unmistakable, as its core case study. It focused on unconscious bias, de-escalation techniques, and a new unbreakable rule. In any seating dispute, the default action was to protect the ticketed passenger, not to appease the one making the most noise. Robert Sinclair personally sat in on the first dozen sessions. A few weeks after the incident, Chloe and Jordan were in the living room of their London home. The story had faded from the headlines, replaced by the next 24-hour news cycle. Chloe was sketching a new confidence in her strokes. Jordan was reading a report their father had sent them, a summary of the new training initiative. "He's calling it the way up," Jordan said, looking over at his sister. "The new training program. It's about lifting everyone up to the same standard of respect." Chloe smiled. "That sounds like Dad." She looked at her drawing. It was of two figures, silhouetted against an airplane window. Looking out at the clouds, they looked strong, resilient. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "it was awful what happened. I felt so small." "I know," Jordan said. "But now," she continued, "seeing what Dad is doing with it, it feels like it meant something, like our bad day might stop someone else from having one like it." Jordan nodded in agreement. The karma that had struck Karen Preston and Susan Miller had been swift and satisfying. But this was different. This was lasting change. It was the quiet, determined work of turning a moment of ugly injustice into a catalyst for something better. It was the Sinclair way. They had been grounded for a few minutes on the tarmac at JFK, but the incident had set in motion a change that would help the entire airline and everyone who flew with it to truly take flight. 1 year later, the world moves on. News cycles churn, public outrage finds new targets, and viral moments fade into the digital ether. But for those at the heart of the storm on Aura Airlines Flight 114, the echoes of that day continued to shape their lives in profound and irrevocable ways. For Karen Preston and her husband, the karma was not a fleeting storm, but a permanent change in climate. Their deplaning was just the beginning. The global shaming they endured stripped them of their social standing, and more painfully for them, their financial comfort. Karen's lifestyle brand evaporated. Her name became synonymous with entitled bigotry. Apologies were issued, but they were seen as hollow, self-serving attempts at damage control. Her husband's real estate business, which relied heavily on reputation and networking within an elite circle, suffered collateral damage. Deals fell through, partnerships dissolved, clients quietly took their business elsewhere. A year later, they found themselves in the economy cabin of a budget airline, flying to a cut-rate resort in Mexico, a pale imitation of the luxurious cruises they once frequented. As their plane taxied on the runway at LAX, and immaculate Aura Airlines Boeing 777, identical to the one from that fateful day, pulled up alongside them. Karen stared out the small scratched window at the gleaming fuselage and the elegant Aura logo. She saw the first-class passenger settling in visible through the large clear windows, and a wave of bitter resentment washed over her. She saw a young flight attendant with a warm, genuine smile offer a drink to a passenger, a man with long, neon pink hair and facial tattoos who was laughing and chatting with ease. No one was questioning his presence. The sight was a dagger to her heart. It wasn't just that she had lost her status. It was that the world she tried so desperately to police had moved on, leaving her behind in her own bitterness. She had fought to maintain a standard that existed only in her prejudiced mind, and in doing so had lost everything that gave her a sense of worth. Susan Miller's journey was quieter, but no less transformative. After her termination, she spiraled. For months, she was consumed by anger and denial, painting herself as the victim of a powerful man's overreaction. She applied for positions at other major airlines, but her record was tainted. The story was industry knowledge. No one would touch her. Facing financial ruin, she took a job managing a small independent coffee shop in a quiet suburb of Portland. The work was humbling. She dealt not with high-flying executives, but with students, artists, and retirees. She learned names, remembered orders, and for the first time in years, truly listened to people. One rainy afternoon, a young black woman came in, flustered after a car splashed her with muddy water. Without a second thought, Susan grabbed a cloth, offered her a free coffee, and helped her dry her coat, her actions driven by simple human empathy. That evening, Susan went home and wrote a letter. It was not addressed to Robert Sinclair, the CEO, but to Chloe and Jordan Sinclair, in care of the Aura Airlines corporate office. She didn't make excuses or ask for forgiveness. She simply told her story, her 15 years of growing cynical, of seeing passengers as problems to be managed, of her own unexamined biases. She described how the incident had forced her to confront a part of herself she didn't know existed, and how in the aftermath she was slowly, painfully learning to be a better person. She ended the letter with a simple, heartfelt apology for the humiliation she had caused them. She never knew if they received it, but for her, the act of writing it was a crucial step in moving on, not from the consequences, but from the person she used to be. Aboard another Aura Airlines flight, this one from London to Tokyo, the Sinclair mandate was put to the test. A notoriously difficult passenger in first class, a wealthy tech mogul known for his abrasive personality, began loudly complaining about the passenger next to him, a Sikh man wearing a traditional dasta. The mogul made veiled, offensive comments about security and costumes, demanding the man be moved. The chief purser, a man who had completed the new training just weeks before, approached the situation with calm professionalism. He did not engage with the mogul's prejudice. Instead, he knelt by the Sikh man's seat. "Sir," he said softly, ensuring the other passenger could hear, "I want to apologize for this disturbance. Your comfort and safety are our highest priority. Please let me know if there is anything at all I can do for you." He then stood and addressed the tech mogul directly. "Sir, we have a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory language or harassment of any kind on our flights. This is your only warning. If you continue to cause a disturbance, we will be forced to take further action upon landing. Now can I get you anything to drink?" The mogul, stunned into silence by the crew's refusal to be bullied, slumped back in his seat and ordered a whiskey, his power completely neutralized. The incident was logged, and he received a formal letter from Aura's legal department the next day, warning him that his travel privileges were under review. The system had worked for the Sinclair twins. The year had been one of immense growth. The incident had shattered their political naivety and ignited a new sense of purpose. Jordan, once focused purely on finance, changed his focus at university. He became fascinated by corporate ethics and social responsibility. He spent the summer interning at Aura Airlines, not in the boardroom, but rotating through departments, customer service, baggage handling, crew resources, learning the business from the ground up. He wanted to understand the people his father's decisions affected, to ensure the culture of respect was more than just a mandate from on high. Chloe, meanwhile, poured her experience onto the canvas. She created a stunning series of paintings titled Row 38. They were abstract and deeply emotional, capturing the feelings of shame, anger, visibility, and invisibility. One powerful piece depicted two shadowy figures in cramped seats, with the faint, luxurious outlines of the first-class cabin visible yet impossibly far away. Her work was featured in a prestigious young artists to watch gallery show in London. A famous art critic praised her ability to transform a personal moment of injustice into a universal statement on perception and privilege. One of the first and most treasured prints of the series hung in her father's office, a constant reminder of the day everything changed. One evening, Robert Sinclair stood before that print. The year had been challenging, but his company was stronger, his employees were prouder, and his family was closer than ever. He had received Susan Miller's letter and had passed it on to his children, who read it with quiet compassion. He thought of Karen Preston, not with malice, but with a sense of pity for a life lived so small. His victory wasn't in their punishment, but in the proof that his airline and the people in it could be better. He looked at Chloe's painting at the two resilient figures who had faced down ugliness with grace and strength. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Jordan, who was at the JFK Operations Center, with a picture of him and a group of smiling ground crew workers. The text read, "Great team here, Dad. They get it. They really do." Robert Sinclair smiled. The journey had been turbulent. A flight had been grounded. But in the end, a family's values had been affirmed, and an entire corporate culture had been set on a new, better course. The legacy of Flight 114 wasn't one of anger and revenge. It was one of hard-earned, meaningful and lasting change, and so a single act of prejudice on Flight 114 created a ripple effect that no one could have predicted. For Karen Preston and Susan, it was a harsh and public lesson in consequences. But for Aura Airlines, and for the Sinclair family, it became a powerful catalyst for positive change. This story is a potent reminder that standing up against injustice, no matter how small it may seem, can have a profound impact. It shows us that true power isn't about entitlement or authority, but about using your voice and your position to advocate for fairness and respect for everyone. What did you think of this story of hard karma? Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone truly got what they deserved? Share your own stories and thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story as compelling as we did, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to see it, and be sure to subscribe for more unforgettable stories of drama and justice. Thank you for listening.